I've been wanting to do this kind of a list for a long time now, and I think everybody can agree. It's not easy picking your all-time favorite movies of all time, especially when you have to put it in some kind of order. But today, on Cinema's Lot's Top 10 videos, I'm going to attempt to list down my top 20 favorite films of all time. Now, some of you out there may be saying, wait, didn't you do this list like 2 years ago? Yes, I did. And honestly, the more I think about it, I feel like that list may seem a bit outdated now, especially with some more recent movies that I've actually come across and seen. So, now I'm going to do this thing every couple of years, or maybe every year or so, where I do an updated version of my top 20 favorite films of all time. So that way it's consistently updated, and that everybody will know if anything is changed in my opinion. So without further ado, let's get right into my top 20 favorite films of all time. So the first one on my list is a film that I actually reviewed semi-recently. Now this was kind of hard to put comic book movies onto my list because, number one, there's like so many freaking good comic book movies, even today, that it kind of makes it seem like that's in itself is a constantly updated list of the best comic book movies for me. Because there's Guardians of the Galaxy that came out recently, which I also reviewed. And there's the Christopher Nolan Batman movies, the Tim Burton Batman movies. Then there's the first two Christopher Reeve Superman movies. But out of all of the comic books from the 1990s, I decided, and 80s and that sort of thing, is I chose The Crow, starring Brandon Lee from 1994. I came very close to putting Batman Mask of the Phantasm on the list because I really thought that was like my favorite story for Batman, and Batman kind of is my favorite comic book character, but I chose The Crow over any of those movies because I feel it's because of Brandon Lee's just amazing performance in the movie, because I feel like he is the character in this movie. Granted, I feel that way about Michael Keaton in the Tim Burton Batmans, but I feel like Brandon Lee owned this movie significantly, and it really shows that if he didn't die on the set, he really could have had a very long and staggering career. And I feel like this is even better than most of Brandon Lee's father, Bruce Lee's movies, because I feel that most of Bruce Lee's movies, no offense, I think most of them kind of suck. Just because I don't watch movies for action, I watch them for everything, because it's kind of hard to explain, but basically I just think that most of Bruce Lee's movies are just cheesy kung fu movies, even though he's the ultimate, like, most iconic kung fu master in movie history, and that's definitely true. I'm not saying his action scenes aren't amazing or anything, or that the movie Enter the Dragon isn't good or anything. I just felt like movies like The Big Boss and that sort of thing were just kind of, just not that good. But I feel like this movie was way better than any of those movies by his father. And it's just a shame that Brandon Lee was never able to do anything more after this due to his tragic passing. But I love this movie. And this Blu-ray is a very, very great Blu-ray. I actually only got it for $5 at Target, so I was like, that's a pretty good deal. And I remember, like, after the first time I watched this movie, I was like kind of mesmerized by the whole story and everything, because it seemed really unique to me at the time. And I also noticed myself like finding days in which I could get the chance to re-watch this, because I just fell in love with it like immediately. So that's really all I have to say for this one. Go check out my review if you want more info on that one. Coming in next on the list, and keep in mind most of these are in its own order that I set up. It was kind of hard to really judge what I would put the order in, but as of right now I feel like this is like the most consistent order I can put up with. And of course I may, like, even like 2 weeks from now I may say, like, okay, I want this one higher and this one lower on the list, but just keep that in mind. But the next one is Man of Steel. The reason why I'm even picking this as like my favorite live action comic book movie as opposed to everything else, I don't know really what it is about this movie that I loved so much. Maybe it's because of Henry Cavill's awesome performance as Superman, Kal-El, and Clark Kent. You know, I mean, of course, Christopher Reeve is the most iconic Superman and such, but I just really enjoyed this movie to the fullest, and I really feel like this is by far my favorite comic book movie now. I understand a whole lot of people don't like it, you know, and if you don't like this movie, that's fine. You can have your own opinion. And I even stated in my very old my review that I really felt like most of the complaints people were dealing with this movie were kind of stupid. Like you can see my review if you want more of my thoughts on that, but yeah, I just really loved this movie. I really feel like this is the best comic book movie of the past couple of years, at least to my opinion. I mean, of course, the Dark Knight trilogy, the Avengers, and Guardians of the Galaxy are probably, and oh yeah, and Days of Future Past and First Class from the X-Men universe are also fantastic. But I feel like this is by far my favorite, and and much like The Crow, unlike some of the, like, at least the Dark Knight Rises and that sort of thing, I feel like I was more enticed to watch this one again as opposed to most comic book movies that came out semi-recently. Other than maybe Guardians of the Galaxy, because when that comes out on Blu-ray, I'm going to instantly pick it up and watch it like 5 more times because that movie was freaking awesome. Next one on the list is Super 8. Now, I always remember my first time actually seeing this movie in the theater, because I remember before I actually got the chance to watch it in the theater, I remember seeing, I think, one teaser trailer and seeing a few posters and advertisements, and I was thinking to myself huh, that's interesting. The guy who directed the new Star Trek movies and Steven Spielberg involved in a movie seemed kind of interesting to me. But I never thought I was ever going to get the chance to see it, though, because most of my family members really weren't interested in seeing it. Until one day, my sister decided, I want to go watch some, Disney Channel production 108 or something. And my mom took her to see that, and I said, how about I go see a movie that's playing around the same time, and I see it by myself. And it just so happened that Super 8 was playing around the same time, so I decided, okay, what the hell, I'll give this a shot. And I was just watching it, and I was like, who the hell came up with this kind of an imaginative story? Because I love this movie. This is probably one of the best movies in the past couple of years, in my opinion. It's up there with films like Moneyball, The Artist, which all came out in the same year. All 3 of these movies came out in the same year, which blows my mind. That was a pretty good year for movies. But I love the whole story about how these group of kids are wanting to make motion pictures with their own Super 8 millimeter cameras, and I love how it all ties into an epic sci-fi action movie that's kind of in the style of Cloverfield, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and E.T. I love that about this movie, you know, and it has a bunch of really, really great performances from its young actor cast. I just really love this movie. I feel like this may even be J.J. Abrams' best movie. That's just my opinion, of course. I feel like this and the Star Trek movies give me hope that J.J. Abrams will do amazing on the new Star Wars movie that's coming out. Very much looking forward to that. Okay, next up, I couldn't pick between any of these 3 movies because I feel like if I put one or the other, I'd be thinking to myself, no, I kind of like what this one did a little more, but then again, this one's the most classic, but this one's arguably the most entertaining. But I couldn't choose, so if you think this is a cop-out, I don't care. But for the next spot on this list, it's going to be the Evil Dead trilogy. Evil Dead 1, Evil Dead 2, and Army of Darkness. And this is probably my favorite horror film trilogy of all time, probably. I just love the imaginative creativity that Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell put into these movies. And there is a remake of this that came out recently, and if I haven't seen the remake yet, but ultimately I'm not too interested in seeing it anymore because even though Sam Raimi produced it, and I heard something about a Bruce Campbell cameo happening towards the end of the movie. I have no idea. But I'm not too interested in seeing that really because it's thinking of these the entire time. But the original was a low-budget independent movie and relied on heavy atmosphere and bloodshed. And it also has a lot of stop-motion effects towards the end, and it's a really dying art, and it's just so appealing to look at all the like creations and monsters that they created for this movie. It's really a classic in its own right. Evil Dead 2. Every time I usually think of the trilogy, I usually think of this one as my favorite because I love like everything they were getting away with in this movie. They upped the special effects to the highest degree, and I also feel like Bruce Campbell's performance is also far much improved. The beginning of the movie kind of acts as though it's a remake of the first movie a little bit, and it kind of is, but at the same time it works for its own rights. And ultimately, I think this is the most entertaining as a whole because it has the best balance between comedy, horror, and action. Seeing Bruce Campbell with that freaking chainsaw arm and a double-barrel shotgun, how is that not fucking awesome? I mean, someday I may get to reviewing these movies, but yeah, this one's arguably my favorite, but again, I still can't pick between the three of them. I love them all equally. And then there's Army of Darkness, which this one's more of like this one kind of like dumbed down a lot of the horror aspects of the movie, and it's more of an action comedy. But does that really make a difference to me? No, no. Because I would even say this is one of the funniest movies in existence. There's too many catchy one-liners to count for. Bruce Campbell's performance is so like flawless in this movie for his character, and all the like animatronic skeletons and stop-motion effects. It's, oh my god, like I just can't explain enough why I love these movies so much. And they just seem like a dying art to me, and that's why I wish they would have made an Evil Dead 4 despite Bruce Campbell's age, you know, but, well, we always have the originals even though we had a remake. The next one on my list, now, I was thinking about what my what my favorite Stanley Kubrick film of all time was, because Stanley Kubrick is one of my all-time favorite filmmakers. I really love how he does or I should say how he did his movies more in an artistic standpoint, where he relied on the visual and like the visual type of storytelling to actually tell the story, which to me doesn't usually happen at all these days. The closest movie I'd say that came to doing something even remotely what Stanley Kubrick even did would be The Artist, but even then that was meant to be like a silent film, you know, for the new age. And honestly, nobody's made a movie like Stanley Kubrick made in years. And I feel like nobody could make movies like Stanley Kubrick, and that's why he's such a great filmmaker. And I was thinking about what my favorite film by him was, because there's like 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is like the grand champion of like epic science fiction films, usually. And I was also thinking, okay, there's The Shining, which is one of the greatest psychological horror movies of all time, with one of Jack Nicholson's greatest performances. But then I was also thinking there's also Full Metal Jacket, which is one of the best war movies I've ever seen. That and Platoon could very well be my favorite war movies. But in the end, I decided to go with Clockwork Orange. I really consider this movie to be a life-changing movie, questioning like human rights and society and such. It also has it really has a really disturbing bleak look into the future for what it is, and it's largely considered a science fiction film because of like the kind of subject matter they kind of deal with in the movie, and it has a brilliant performance by Malcolm McDowell. I really feel like this is Stanley Kubrick's masterwork. It's also quite possibly his most controversial film. Well, I mean, every one of Stanley Kubrick's films has had some sort of controversy, like Lolita, you know, like the subject matter, most people didn't quite catch on to. With Spartacus, you know, Stanley Kubrick didn't really like the way the film turned out because he really wasn't in control of the movie. And with 2001, many people were like, what's the point of the movie and that sort of thing. And of course, people didn't understand The Shining at first, and blah, yada yada yada. And while I do admit that arguably something like 2001 may even be the overall better movie, I feel like Clockwork Orange is his most easily accessible motion picture for people to get into, because it really feels like Stanley Kubrick did the best of his artistic visual with a typical film that is entertaining and accessible for most audiences. It's a very graphic kind of movie, so parents, if you're somehow watching this, I doubt anybody's that is watching this, but this is definitely not a kids movie by any stretch of the imagination. You know, but even though it's a very violent movie, I feel like I really do love the story very much in the movie, and it's my favorite Stanley Kubrick movie. Now, speaking of violent movies, the next film on my list is, I'd probably say, is the most violent film of all time, Scarface. I was kind of, like, I remember in my original top 20 favorite films list, I remember I put the Godfather trilogy in there, and while I still do love the Godfather trilogy, I feel like Scarface is like that one mob movie I could go back and watch more and more and more often than most. And this was also my introduction to the gangster film genre. And I mean, of course, everybody knows about the famous ending sequence and everything. And I also just recently reviewed this movie, so if you want more of my thoughts on this movie, go check out my review for this. But yeah, I've always loved the story to this about a local immigrant that is wanting to set a new life in America in the 1980s, and soon he decides to turn to a life of crime to be able to actually get anywhere in life. And then once he climbs all the way up to the gangster totem pole, he loses it all. And what's so great about this movie is how attached you become to the character of Tony Montana, played by Al Pacino. Even though he does bad things and kills people, he has his limits. And I think I forgot to mention in my review that there was a scene in which Tony is supposed to kill this government agent or whatnot, but he refuses to do it because in the car where an explosive they put in there's women and children inside, so he refuses to blow up the car and kill them. It really shows like the dramatic input of his character so much. And one thing that some people don't tend to realize with this movie is that this is a remake. This is a remake of a 1932 mobster movie that was actually based off the legendary gangster Al Capone. That always surprised me when I first heard this was a remake, actually. And it still kind of surprises me that this is a remake. And I would even say this is like the best remake in movie history. Again, just my opinion, but yeah, that's how I feel about it. So if you want like a good gangster movie to get into, I'd say this and Goodfellas and maybe Pulp Fiction are like the most easily accessible ones to get into, because the thing about The Godfather is that they put more emphasis on the dialogue, whereas something like this and Goodfellas and Pulp Fiction, they're more about the stories as well as some of the more grotesque kind of stuff. So, and much like Clockwork Orange, this is not a kid's movie by any stretch of the imagination. But next movie on our list, getting away from that subject matter, is one of the most unique movies I've ever watched in my entire life as a moviegoer, and that's Ed Wood. This is actually by far my favorite Tim Burton movie. Even though I do love films like, I do love his Batman movies, I do love Corpse Bride. I think that movie's such a unique and creative animated film. I almost wanted to include it in my top 10 favorite animated films, but I didn't, just because I felt like Tarzan had a little more importance to me. That's just what I think. But I always loved Ed Wood because I love how they take a look at, well, who is considered to be the worst filmmaker in history, Edward D. Wood Jr., who's known for making the absolute worst movies in existence, like Plan 9 from Outer Space, Glenn or Glenda, and Bride of the Monster, you know. And this movie details his career, about how he made some of his movies and the creative structure that he wanted to put into those movies. Because the thing about this movie is that it shows that even though he was wasting everybody's time and everybody's money with making these movies, he never gave up, and he didn't care what anybody thought of the movies. He just stuck to his gun and made the movies. And that's kind of something that some people don't tend to do sometimes. And I feel like this is a very good movie to look at and analyze, because it's like, because nobody should really take negativity onto them too greatly. I mean, first of all, if you're getting into YouTube, you need to be able to deal with criticism, and I feel like this movie can help you actually understand that, because no matter who like bitched at him about like making the worst movies ever made, he still kept going because he stuck true to his roots. And he also, the movie also brings up an interesting point that you shouldn't always let people change up what your dreams are. In other words, why waste your time making other people's dreams come true when you can make your own dreams come true? You know? And that line is actually said by Orson Welles, who is hailed as one of the all-time greatest filmmakers of all time for making films like Citizen Kane. But yeah, I love this movie. Johnny Depp's performance in this is like absolutely timeless in my opinion. I can't believe, I'm not sure if he got nominated for an Oscar for this movie, but I kind of wish he did, because his performance is just spot on in this movie. I also love Bill Murray in this movie. He has kind of a small part, but when he's in it, he's pretty funny. But by far, the best performance in the movie by far is Martin Landau as Bela Lugosi, the legendary, or I should say the most commonly well-recognized Dracula, who played Dracula in the 1930s, Dracula from Universal, that everybody seems to recognize more often. His performance is so good in this movie that the Academy actually did give him an Oscar for his performance. And it's not every day that you actually see a movie like this give an Oscar to a performance that most people would say is one of the best performances in movie history, and the Academy would be like, it's a good performance, but it's missing that little bit of to it, so no. But if you haven't seen this movie yet, definitely check it out. It's all shot in black and white, and it just looks gorgeous, and if you haven't seen this movie, I highly recommend it. It's one of the greats. A very underrated great movie in my opinion. So anyways, the next movie I have on my list is, now I had a hard time thinking about whether or not I was going to put this movie on the list, because it's a Christmas movie. And the thing about me in Christmas movies is that I love Christmas movies. I love a good number of them. Some of them, I mean, some are, there's some Christmas movies I think that are just okay. But there's some that I really do love, and I love watching like every time during the holiday season. But this one, I feel like, if it wasn't because it was a Christmas movie, I feel like I could watch it anytime, any day, anywhere, and still love it to death. Because I feel like this is better than a normal Christmas movie. And no, it's not Christmas Vacation, it's A Christmas Story. I feel like this is like one of the best movies ever made right here. Especially because it's a Christmas movie, I think. Because even though it's a Christmas movie, I feel like it's so much more than that. Because it has a lot to do with family, friendship, and it also has a lot... the basic element of this movie is childhood. It's like remembering childhood memories, because normally when you talk about childhood memories around Christmas time, sure, you'll mention about the times when you got like certain presents, or like when you got your turkey eaten by a bunch of rabid dogs and you had to go to like a little Chinese diner just so that way you could have your Christmas dinner or something. What, you never had that? Happens in the movie. But yeah. But you also remember like all the stuff you used to do, like when you went to school. You remember like the activities you used to do with your friends. You remember like the bullies that would always like pester you every day and chance you got. You remember like all the news and broadcast recordings you would always listen to, or at least nowadays you'd be like, oh yeah, I remember when I watched that show and everything. You know, this movie, it talks about that sort of stuff, about this kid who is reminiscing about all of his childhood memories around this one in particular Christmas, in which he wants a Red Ryder BB gun for Christmas, and he basically, the whole movie, he's hoping that he can find some way to make sure that he can get one for Christmas, whether if it's asking his folks, then like writing a poem about it in his class, to the point where he goes to the mall to ask Santa about it. And the movie's freaking hilarious. Like, the movie has so much like subtle humor, and it has much like a lot of great comedies. It has so many quotable. It's a very quotable kind of movie, I should say. And there's so many memorable moments, from like the pink bunny suit to the rabid dogs, to the infamous hooker leg lamp, to everything. Like, it's an all-time classic in my opinion, and I really feel like it's the best Christmas movie ever made. Again, there's like some other ones like Christmas Vacation and some of the Christmas carols and that sort of thing, and Die Hard. No, I'm kidding. And Gremlins and that sort of thing. But I feel like this is the Christmas movie. I tend to watch like 50 million times each and every Christmas season. You know, like sometimes I'll even watch like Christmas Vacation like maybe two, 3, or 4 times, you know, because I've seen it so many times. You know, kind of the same thing with maybe like Gremlins or Die Hard. But this one, I will watch like 24/7 almost around Christmas, the Christmas season, because it is a Christmas movie still, you know. But other than that, though, it really also, I also feel like this movie shows like what the true meaning of Christmas is a little bit differently, but still very impactfully, more so than some other Christmas movies I feel like I've ever seen. But if you haven't seen this yet, definitely check it out. And this is the Blu-ray of it. I highly recommend you get the Blu-ray of it for the widescreen presentation, because if you get the DVD version, it's the crappy pan scan 4:3 screen ratio, which I think is awful, which is why I recommend you get the Blu-ray of this. It's also, they really did a good job with cleaning the movie up in this Blu-ray. But yeah, go see this movie if you haven't watched it yet. The next movie on the list is, this is a movie that actually took me a while, like when I was younger, it took me a while to really get into it, I should say, because the first time I heard about it, I was just kind of like, I don't know if I want to watch it. Then I watched it once, and I was like, that's pretty cool. But then I got the DVD of it, and I was thinking to myself, like, it's cool, you know, I don't know. But then I watched it again on, like, TV, and I was thinking, this is kind of cool. But then I decided to rewatch it, the whole movie on DVD, and I was thinking to myself, this movie's awesome. This movie's, like, freaking awesome. And as the years have gone by, I've watched it countless times to the point where I need to just get this on Blu-ray now, and that's The Goonies. Oh, and for curiosity's sake, I have a Goonies t-shirt on. Yeah. But, this is like one of the most entertaining movies in existence. Technically speaking, this is a kids movie in some ways, but it's so much more better than a normal kids movie. The story is written by Steven Spielberg. It's the screenplay is actually written by Chris Columbus, who actually helped do like the first 2 Home Alone movies, which I love the first Home Alone. I'm not too crazy about the second one, but I love the first one. That's another good Christmas movie, actually. Huh, a lot of good Christmas movies. And it's even directed by Richard Donner, who even did the very first Christopher Reeve Superman movie, which is always cool. But yeah, I consider this to be one of the crowning achievements of the 1980s in terms of movies, because very rarely do you come across a movie that has such a cult status to itself. Like, you can't really think of much more movies that are like this that have such a big cult following like it does, you know? And I love all the young adult and young teen actors in the movie. They all do a great job. They all have lots of memorable dialogue and moments. And it's also one of the funniest movies ever made, with the Chunk character being probably the funniest character in the frickin' movie. But yeah, I don't really think I need to further explain anymore why I love this movie. I'm wearing the T-shirt of it, but and everybody's seen this movie probably, so there's not really much reason to mention it other than I need to get this on Blu-ray eventually. Next movie on the list. This was actually one that when I first watched, I was like, that was a good movie, but I felt like I never thought like it would actually be in like my favorite movies of all time or anything like that. I never thought it would get up to that point. But again, much like with The Crow, I decided that I'd rewatch it, and then I decided, you know what, this is even better than the first time I watched it. And then I watched it again and again and again, to the point where I said, you know what, it's in my favorite movies of all time now. And that's Lost Boys. Again, this is another movie I'm going to have to upgrade to Blu-ray. But this is one of those movies I'll usually bring up when people say, like, oh, I hate Joel Schumacher, like, he ruined the Batman franchise and everything. Sure, Batman and Robin was a complete catastrophe, but Joel Schumacher is, I think he's actually a decent filmmaker, and this is one of his crowning achievements, in my opinion. It's one of those vampire movies that you can watch over and over and over again. It has a fun, kind of unique story to it, where it's about this this family that's kind of broke, and so they have to move into Santa Carla, California to live with their grandfather and such. And it happens to be the murder capital of the world, supposedly, or of the country, or something like that. And it's all because it's inhabited by vampires, obviously. And yeah, there's lots of great performances by like Kiefer Sutherland and Corey Feldman, Corey Haim, Edward Harriman, is that what you say? Yeah, I'm assuming that's what it is. And Jason Patric and that sort of thing. It has a really good cast in it. It's just much like Goonies, it's just one of those movies that's just so entertaining and fun to watch that you could watch it over and over again. And coincidentally, this one's actually produced by Richard Donner. Well, that about sums it up. Let's try to wrap this up here. But next movie on the list is Aliens. Now, I remember the first time I heard about the Alien franchise, and the first time I heard about it was, I remember going on the Great Movie Ride at Disney's Hollywood Studios in Florida, and I remember going on that ride, and I was thinking to myself, wow, that Alien segment is so freaking cool! Like, the sets, the music, the sound effects, the alien creatures themselves, oh, so awesome. And it wasn't until like I was in my early teens that I actually finally got the chance to watch the original Alien, and I would consider that to be one of the greatest horror movies of all time. Or one of the best horror movies in the science fiction genre that kind of bridges the gap. You know, as much as I do love the original though, I'll always remember Aliens as being by far my favorites for pretty much the most obvious reasons. You know, I love Sigourney Weaver's performance in the movie. She was even nominated for an Oscar in this movie, which is kind of ironic because normally the Academy doesn't usually give out like Oscar nominations to characters in like action, sci-fi, horror movies like this. So that's kind of an interesting piece of trivia. I love the story. I love everything James Cameron did with the lore. And of course this went on to inspire several other alien-like movies and science fiction films alike. And tons of video games like Doom, Half-Life, and Halo. You know, and if you want to know what my thoughts are on Colonial Marines, fuck that game into oblivion and fuck Gearbox for what they did to the license. I can't even believe what they did to the license. But just try to think about the goodness. Just think about the goodness here. But if you haven't seen this movie, if not anything because you felt like that Colonial Marines thing kind of made you feel like, oh, well, now it's going to make the movie look bad. Trust me when I say this movie is great. You can't pass it up, people, just because of one horrible video game. I am kind of still looking forward to Alien Isolation, though. I will admit that. Next up on the list is E.T. This I consider to be Steven Spielberg's greatest movie. And yes, this is going to be another movie I need to upgrade to Blu-ray sometime soon. But I always loved this movie as a kid. I would watch it time and time again. And I always, and this was kind of the movie that, it's kind of funny that this is the kind of movie that made me want to get a bicycle and just drive around on a bicycle. I don't know, because seeing all the kids and the teenagers have the bikes in the movie, it just, to me, it just kind of felt like it kind of inspired me to want to ride a bike almost, you know, in a funny way. But I just love the story to this, you know, it's one of the most emotionally gripping movies ever. And again, I consider it to be Steven Spielberg's best movie, so not much to say. I need to get it on Blu-ray for the original theatrical cut because this is the special edition. Though I don't mind the special edition as much as another film franchise that I'll get to in a second. Okay, so anyways, the next one on my list is American Graffiti. Now, I remember the first time I heard about this movie was when I saw the Empire of Dreams documentary on the Star Wars trilogy. I love that documentary, by the way. But it mentioned about George Lucas's early days of filmmaking before he made Star Wars. And this was the second movie he ever made, the first being THX 1138. And I love this movie. I just love how great it recreates the 1960s, where everybody just loves having their own car, and everybody's off doing their own shenanigans. This is like it's an ultimate feel-good movie, I think, in my opinion. And also, one thing I love about it is how influential it is to most high school movies are. You know, from the way like from all the different adventures that the characters get into. Like there's this one character played by Richard Dreyfuss that's on this hunt to meet this Blondie who drives a Thunderbird, and he gets caught up with criminals and a bunch of old high school friends that he hasn't really talked to in a long time, just to see if he can get that one step closer to getting a phone call from her. And then there's these characters played by Ron Howard and Cindy Williams, where their relationship's just kind of like having some difficulties because Ron Howard's character is wanting to go off to college, and Cindy Williams' character is wanting to like stay and all that. So their relationship kind of has some issues with itself. Then there's like Paul Le Mat's character who gets caught up with having this young middle schooler being driven around by him, and then there's like a lot of like fun stuff that happens in this movie, and it's all backed up by an amazing soundtrack of songs from the 1960s, ranging from like the Beach Boys and Chuck Berry and that sort of thing. So it's a really fun soundtrack, and it's just a very, very entertaining movie. It just gets the feels going in a good way. It's a feel-good movie. And it also has one of Harrison Ford's earliest performances in his career, and he plays a smaller part in this movie, but when he's in it, he's pretty fun and pretty entertaining. But yeah, I love this movie. It's just one of the most entertaining movies I've ever watched, and it's a movie I could watch that I could watch anytime, anywhere, and I could still get 100% enjoyment out of it. I feel now the edition that I have of the movie right here is the drive-in double feature pack, which includes the sequel, More American Graffiti. Now, More American Graffiti has actually been a movie I've been thinking about wanting to review because I consider that to be one of the absolute worst sequels in movie history. No joke, like the first time I actually watched the sequel, I said to myself, this is boring. Like, how did they make all these characters that I loved from the first movie get so boring? And then they add these new characters that are just complete, like, throwaways. Like, they're not even funny or anything. They're just kind of dumb. The sequel kind of dealt a little more with, like, the hippie-turned generation, where, people were, like, doing drugs all the time. Like, the first movie dealt more with the early 60s, in which there wasn't really as much of the drug and hippie thing that was going on in the Vietnam. The sequel deals more like with the events like during Vietnam and the hippie pot smoking generation, And while it's an interesting idea, and sometimes I could even see like some good things coming out of it, I really feel like they put like no effort into it whatsoever. The only interesting story that actually happens in the second one is Paul Le Mat's character, who is caught up with drag racing. Other than that, the movie is a complete bomb, in my opinion, of course. So take my advice, don't watch the sequel, just stick with the original. The original's on Blu-ray, so don't even bother with that. And I consider this and the Star Wars trilogy to really be among not Harrison Ford, but among George Lucas's greatest achievements. And I always wished that he could have went back and made an actual movie, instead of like just butchering like the Star Wars trilogy for years and years to come with the special editions. But that's a completely different subject to talk about. Now the next movie is I have a really big problem with the horror genre these days. I think that I feel like if the horror genre were to die as of right now, like if they were just going to stop making horror movies, I would say to myself, okay, that's fine with me. I don't really give a crap. Because to be honest, the horror genre these days sucks. I don't like it whatsoever. I understand some people did like The Conjuring, but I've not seen that one yet. But stuff like everything from like Paranormal Activity to The Last Exorcism to what was that one? The Purge and The Devil Inside and all that other shit. Like, I don't like those movies. If you like those movies, good for you. They're just not my cup of tea. I especially didn't like Paranormal Activity. I thought that movie was just incredibly boring and just dumb. I just felt that movie was dumb in my opinion. However, if I was to say there was a horror movie out there that I would say best represents the genre and why it's important and why I still hold out even a teeny bit of hope for the future, is Psycho. Alfred Hitchcock's 1960 masterpiece, Psycho. This is arguably the movie that started the slasher genre in the horror universe, meaning like, movies like Halloween, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Scream to a certain extent. But I've always thought Psycho was the best of them all because, number one, you have one of the most legendary filmmakers, Alfred Hitchcock, in the director's chair, and also it plays with your, it kind of plays with your mind actually a lot more than any of those movies, other than maybe Nightmare on Elm Street, in my opinion, because one thing that's so brilliant about this movie is that the beginning, in the first like 20 minutes of the movie, you assume that the character played by Janet Leigh is supposed to be the main character of the movie, and it actually does seem that way. But then she's killed off, like in the infamous shower scene that we all know of by this point, and it's like, what? Wait, what? The main character that's been advertised in the posters and in the trailers is dead now? What? Like, it was shocking for the time, and in 1960, this is a graphic film for the 1960s, and it also has a spectacular performance, however, by Anthony Perkins, who plays Norman Bates. He's like, that's like one of the most untouchable performances in movie history, and it's one of the reasons why whenever like a remake, now normally my thing about remakes actually is that it's okay if you do a remake because we always still have the originals, but there's one remake though that I do not think deserves to even be amounted in film history whatsoever and should just die and burn in hell. Don't care about that piece of shit. But definitely avoid that remake, by the way, but definitely check out the original. It's a masterpiece for sure, and by far my favorite film by Alfred Hitchcock. I mean, I do like Vertigo, and I do like Rear Window, and The Birds, and North by Northwest, but this is Alfred Hitchcock's film I could watch, again, just over and over and over and over again. I just love it that much. Okay, now the next film on my list, now, the thing about me and getting emotional in movies is that sometimes it really does take a lot of effort to really get a lot of emotion out of me in a movie. So, whenever somebody says like, oh, I cried at that movie, and it's like, okay, you cried in the movie because you felt like you actually got attached to the characters, or you really enjoyed the story that much that it actually got an emotion out of you. And I feel like one of the movies that really did that to me more than any of them was James Cameron's Titanic from 1997. Yeah, guys, I love Titanic. What can I say? This is like one of the greatest, like, I would say this is the greatest disaster movie of all time because it's so much more than a disaster movie. And the thing about this movie is that I have a similar experience with this that I did with Scarface, in which the first time I watched it, I was like, that's a really cool movie. And I actually get sucked into it, and I actually start, like, talking about it a little bit, I start thinking about it a bunch, and I start, like, just talking about it every now and then. But then comes a point where I've seen so many movies that I feel like that I just sort of just stop talking about it or stop researching it or whatnot. And I just sort of just keep it in my collection. And whenever somebody would bring it up, I'll be like, yeah, I like the movie. I like the movie, definitely. But then came the 15th anniversary 3D re-release of this movie, and I told my dad that I would actually be interested in seeing it. So me and my dad went out, and I was like, that might have been the coolest thing I've ever seen on the big screen in the movie theater. So what me and my dad did was we went again. We actually went to the theater and saw this thing twice on the big screen because we loved it so much. And it's not just because it looked amazing in 3D, or that the stuff towards the end of the movie with the ship sinking was just awesome to watch on the screen, but I just love the story. I just love the story about Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet and their relationship and how it's like a 1-in-a-million opportunity in the movie. But yeah, when I was a kid, I would watch it, and I did get, emotionally invested, but it wasn't like I cried or anything, because when I saw this on the big screen, I didn't see the movie in like maybe over a year or maybe even over 2 years or something. So I felt like my experience and feelings for the movie definitely changed after I saw it on the big screen for sure. So, yeah, I just love this movie. You can make fun of me all you want, but it's a great movie. Okay, now, next one on the list. Now, with all of that I've just said there throughout this entire video, this is the one trilogy I never, like, at one point I would say, like, this is, like, one of the most important things to my childhood, at least. But the more, like, as years have come by, I kept thinking, like, I love these movies, but I don't really feel like they're in my top 20 favorite films of all time or anything. And I thought that for a very long time until, like about over a year ago, in which I got my hands on the 2006 theatrical cut DVDs that have the original unaltered versions, which are the versions I watched on VHS when I was a kid. And then I decided, okay, I'll check them out, and okay, so I'll see how much I can get them for, and I'd rewatch them. And I just realized I'm an idiot for not putting this in my top 20 favorite films of all time, and that is the original Star Wars trilogy, my friends. Yep. These are the rare 2006 theatrical cut DVDs in widescreen. I wanted to get these because, number one, they're the original unaltered theatrical cuts packaged along with the cruddy 2004 special editions. But also I wanted to get them in widescreen because my old Star Wars DVDs were all in full screen and they all looked shitty. So I was really lucky to finally get my hands on these. And I don't need to further explain why Star Wars is the greatest film trilogy of all time. The first one was so revolutionary for film history, and it's one of the few like science fiction, fantasy, action movies that actually got nominated for several Oscars. Empire Strikes Back, one of the greatest sequels in film history right here, if not the greatest sequel of all time. They did so much with this movie. They emptied up the darkness value of the movie, they updated the character development to a great extent, and they expanded the universe and the story so amazingly. It's probably the best sequel ever made right there. And then there's Return of the Jedi, which there's the occasional person who doesn't care for it that much, but I used to watch, I think this was the one I watched the most when I was a kid, and when I'm watching the whole trilogy, I feel like this wraps up the story perfectly, and I just love the whole story element between Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader. It's the driving force of this movie for sure. So if you can somehow get your hands on these, I definitely would recommend picking them up because these DVDs are awesome. Granted, if you watch them on like a flat screen like HD TV and playing them through like a PS3 with an HDMI cable hooked up, you'll notice that these are in letterbox form, which means that there will be a black bar like all across the screen, all around the screen in a somewhat circular, but more like a rectangular kind of view almost. But if you watch the special editions, they're not like that at all, which I can understand angered a lot of fans when these first came out. Honestly, I really don't care because I can suffer scourge through like a little bit less of a lower quality visual content as well, as long as like the movies themselves are still the original versions, you know. I really wish these would come out on Blu-ray, the unaltered cuts. Possibly next year when Star Wars Episode 7 comes out, they will re-release the unaltered versions on Blu-ray. I'm hoping because that would make every Star Wars fan in the universe just praising the gods, thinking, "Thank you, God!" But until then, we just have to hunt down these incredibly rare DVDs. It's just unfortunate. And yes, I paid about 40, 20, and 30 again for these 3 DVDs. That's how much I love these movies, folks. Alright. The next one, though, is, I already talked about this movie semi-recently, and I talked about how awesome the 30th anniversary remastering in theaters was. And I'm actually going to be having the 30th anniversary poster coming to my front doorstep very, very soon. But the next movie on my list is Ghostbusters. I don't think anybody needs to really needs an explanation why Ghostbusters is one of the greatest franchises in movie history. You know, I didn't include the second one on this list because I felt like I feel like even though I love the second one, I feel like there's just an element to it that I just don't like as opposed to the original. I guess that's due to the fact that in the beginning, the Ghostbusters are not like in their jobs anymore. They're doing their own separate thing, you know. They're kind of split up, and the first section of the movie is them like regaining their job back, you know, and sort of thing. It kind of reminds me a lot of the first movie about in the first one where they're first starting out and they're getting their business started. I guess that's the one element that I feel like kind of drags it just a little bit down. But even then, I still love the movie. I love the story, and I do love a lot of the new situations they put up with in the sequel. And they really did try to make the second one good, people. Okay, you know, I understand not everybody likes the second one, but I really do like it. But again, it can't top the original. And yes, I will be getting the 30th anniversary re-released in 4K Blu-ray sometime soon. I'm hoping. But yeah, this Ghostbuster, this and the Star Wars trilogy and another movie I'll be getting to in a second are like the most important movies of my childhood, in my opinion. And seeing this on the big screen was such a treat, in my opinion. And I even paid my own movie ticket for it. Like, I didn't have like any friends or like my parents with me or anything like that. I went to this 30th anniversary re-release in theaters by myself, and I was laughing and just getting so sucked into it like I've never have before. And I swear to God, when the opening title sequence came up for the first time when I watched it on the big screen, I felt like I was about ready to have a heart attack because I was so excited and I was so ready for the movie. And like, if an opening sequence, seeing it like on the big screen, can get you so excited that it actually makes your heart like about ready to stop, that's a good movie right there. But yeah, it's Ghostbusters, and if you want more of my thoughts on this, just go watch my review. Alright, almost done here though. The next one is Stand By Me. I consider this to be possibly the best motion picture that stars young adult actors. It's a coming-of-age story in which these group of kids that hang out with each other all the time in the 1950s, they overhear about the disappearance of this one kid that lives down the street, and one of them manages to hear about it, and they say that his dead corpse is actually out in the woods, and he decides to ask them all if they want to go and check out the dead body. And they all decide, sure, it'll be like a camping hiking trip. So they all gather a whole bunch of stuff and decided to go hike down there on a little fun adventure, thinking, oh wow, we're going to find the dead body and we're going to be heroes, we'll be on TV. And it really shows that people can get excited over something serious like seeing a dead body. And they even mentioned that, like, we're going to see a dead body. Maybe it shouldn't be a party. And I love the human aspect of this movie. I feel like these characters in this movie are not just like stereotyped characters that are made for a motion picture. I feel like these characters are actual human beings, you know. And the performances by Will Wheaton, River Phoenix, Corey Feldman, and Jerry O'Connell, they're all great, you know. And this is just one of those movies, again, I could just watch over and over again and still get emotionally attached to it. And it's a very quotable movie in some retrospects. I feel like not enough people usually look at this as one of the greatest movies of all time, because I think this is one of the best movies ever made. You know, like, I know this is like my top 20 favorite films of all time list, but if I was to make a list of top 100 best motion pictures, meaning like the motion pictures that are hailed as the greatest and the ones that are the most watched and the most talked about, I would say, and also the ones I would say have like the most impact on most people, I'd say this is definitely in that list. Which means I would have to include films like The Godfather, Citizen Kane, and that sort of thing. But then I'd also include like this, Ghostbusters, and Star Wars, and that sort of thing. You know, that's like the kind of list I would say that appeals to everybody, film critics and film fans alike. But yeah, if you haven't seen this movie, it's really, really good. I highly recommend you picking it up. It is on Blu-ray. I need to upgrade it sometime soon. And one last thing is that this is actually an interesting thing about this movie is that it's based off of a Stephen King story, and it's not a horror story. And I always find that so interesting, is that this was based off a Stephen King story. And I actually did read the original story, and honestly, I feel like the film version's better. So, definitely recommend this movie if you haven't seen it yet. It's awesome. Okay, next up on the list is a movie that I kept thinking to whether or not this, Ghostbusters, or Star Wars was the most important film of my childhood. And the more I kept thinking about it, I came to the conclusion that this is probably the most important film of my childhood, and the film that just makes me just feel so good about myself as a film fan, and that's Back to the Future. This is arguably the movie that made me want to become a filmmaker. I feel like this is the movie that actually made me want to become a filmmaker right here. Never have I seen a movie or a comedy and a science fiction film with so much imagination and creativity and the documentaries and everything I keep reading and watching of this, where they mention like how they came up with the DeLorean time machine and all the ideas that they had in their heads about the events and everything that could happen in the movie. This is just one of those movies that's so much fun to talk about with each passing year, and I realize that next year this movie's going to be 30 years old. Like, this movie is so timeless that it doesn't even seem like it is 30 years old, because everybody still sees it. Same thing with Ghostbusters. Everybody sees it. Which is why this is like, I would say this is like one of the top 10 films that should never get a remake. Just because I feel like that kind of just ruins, like, the idea of like people still coming back and seeing like older movies, you know, and that sort of thing. But yeah, everybody knows Back to the Future, so I don't really need to explain too much more of this. Possibly I may review this in the whole trilogy sometime in the future. Now, the only reason I didn't include the whole trilogy on this list and only the first one is because even though I love the sequels, don't get me wrong, I love Part 2 and Part 3, but I feel like I don't have as much well, no, that doesn't make any sense. I do have a huge amount of attachment to those sequels, but I feel like the first one just kind of does everything the best, and arguably it is still the best in the series because, you know, because I feel like I like the story the best in the first one, and I also feel like a lot of the humor and a lot of the quotes are way better in the second one. Not the second one, the first one. Again, I love the sequels, but it's kind of the same thing with Ghostbusters, where it's like, they don't top the original, but they come as close as possible. So, that's my thoughts on this. I will get this on Blu-ray eventually as well. Okay, now for the last one. Now, this one, like most of this list has been done like in order of which I would actually put all these films. But for my number one spot, I actually couldn't pick between two films. And I know some people will be like, "Ooh, you're copping out." I already copped out with the Evil Dead trilogy and the Star Wars trilogy, so I don't really care how much more I cop out now. But these are the two movies that to me kind of mean the most to me in terms of like about like human nature and like what it means to me to like be a film fan and also to respect like drama and that sort of thing. And it also kind of makes me, and these are like the films that make me like respect the art of filmmaking probably to the highest degree, you know. And I just can't pick which one's my number one. And I might have said this in my original top 20 favorite films of all time, but I feel like I just can't pick between the two of them. And that's Shawshank Redemption from 1994 and Princess Mononoke from 1997 and 1999. 1999 for the English dub for this. Yeah, I just can't pick between these films, guys. They're two like perfect movies. Like, these are like the examples of what I would say are perfect movies. Movies that everybody should try out. Everybody usually gets to see Shawshank Redemption every so often, but Princess Mononoke kind of goes a little more obscure, which I guess it's because this is a Studio Ghibli film that originally was not owned by Disney. This, I think, got licensed by Disney recently, and that's why there's going to be a Blu-ray release of this coming out, which I can't wait for, because I am really looking forward to seeing this movie on Blu-ray, as long as it's still the original version, of course. But, yeah, I just love, the thing about Shawshank Redemption is that I love the driving force of the characters played by Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman. I feel like they are the center of the movie, and the longer that you stay with them, the more you get attached to them, to the point when they both actually manage to get out of this hellhole of a prison, you really feel like you really want them to actually still be best friends and get back together, and it's such a timeless movie in my opinion. And then for Princess Mononoke, this is more of an art house film. That's definitely true, but it's like this is the kind of reason, this is the movie in which makes me feel proud that I am a fan of Japanese animation, because I love the rich storytelling. Because this is one of those films I feel like could never be done in live action. From the way the acting's done, to the way that they tell the story, to the action, to the creatures that are seen in this movie. Like, this is a perfect example of dying art right here, because everything in this movie, aside from a few minor scenes, is all hand-drawn. And I just love that about this movie. And I mentioned this is my favorite animated film of all time. It will always be. So, these are my top 2 favorite films of all time. I can't pick which one is number 1 and which one's number 2, so they're both my number 1, and Back to the Future is my number 2. So, definitely check these out if you haven't seen them yet. I'm sure everybody's seen Shawshank Redemption eventually, so definitely check these out and tell me what you think. This one is on Blu-ray right now. This one's coming to Blu-ray, I think, soon. If not soon, it's probably out by now, so definitely check them out. Okay, well, I'm almost out of camera time here, so thank you guys so much for watching. If you want more top 10s, please give this a thumbs up, leave a comment, and give me suggestions for top 10 videos in the future if you want in the comment section. Be sure to check out my new Facebook page, and coming soon, there's going to be a Twitter page, actually, for Cinemas Lot. So, thanks a lot, guys, for watching, and don't worry about that Psycho DVD. No matter how many times I try to throw that thing around the freaking house, it always stays fine and always plays fine. I'm about ready to burn that fucking piece of shit eventually. But tell me what you guys think in the comments about my films, and tell me what some of your favorite films of all time are in the comments, and I'll see you guys next time in the next video. See you guys later. Bye.